Welcome to Beyond Church Walls. I am your host, Brad Crow. Around here, we discuss various topics from a biblical perspective and the perspective of Christ followers. Thank you for joining today, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Brad Crow, and this is the very first episode of 2025. It sounds odd to hear 2025 still, but before we know it, we'll be comfortable with it, and we'll be writing out the date, and we will not be scribbling out the 4 and writing in the 5. If you're anything like me, it'll take you half the year, but you'll finally figure it out. I really do like the new year. It gives me an opportunity to look back, examine the previous year, maybe see some things that went well, some things that I really didn't like. And it gives me an opportunity to set some goals for the future. I know a lot of people will make a New Year's resolution. I looked at one time and it was like 60 something, almost 70% of people would be making New Year's resolutions. And most of those, it said, were fitness oriented. So people would want to run a mile. I don't know why they would want to run a mile. People would want to join the gym. And we do know that gym memberships and things of that nature go up after the first of the year because people want a new year, new me. We have these phones now attached to our hips. And I used to have a watch that I would wear, an Apple Watch. And it would tell me how many steps I would have at the end of the day. And I noticed that my steps in the day were like absolutely horrendous. I would go days where I'm not even hitting 1,000 steps. A whole day at about 1,000 to 1,500 steps would be somewhat on the average. If I was really lucky and I had to leave the house or something, sometimes I would get 2,000, 2,500, but most of the time it was 1,500 or less. And that's pretty horrible. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'm not taking my phone with me everywhere I go. But that was not the case. I was just being really lazy. And so after the first of the year, I set a goal. I was going to get 10,000 steps every day. And boy, did I start off with a bang. And I began to realize how long it took to get 10,000 steps in. It's very time consuming. And I looked up how many steps is in a mile, because in my mind, I didn't realize how many steps 10,000 was when you equate it to a mile. And I looked up and it said that the average person will take 2,000 steps per mile. So I was going from not walking a mile a day to walking 5 miles every single day. And after a few weeks of this, I thought, I don't think I have the time for this. So I began to dial it back a little bit and said, I want to get 6,000 steps every day. And I thought, that's 3 miles a day. That seems more reasonable. And so I set a goal of 6,000 steps a day. I just wanted to average that. Some days I would get on like a weekend, maybe I would get 10,000 steps. And then there might be a day where I maybe only get 3,000 or 4,000. But at the end of the week, I wanted to be on an average of 6,000 steps per day. And I did really well for the year. I don't think I quite hit my goal, but I did get in a lot more steps. And so to me, that was an improvement. And I was happy with that. What I'm trying to say is, set realistic goals. If you do set a goal for yourself, don't go out there and go from I don't ever pray to I'm going to start praying 2 hours every day. Or I don't ever read my Bible. I'm going to read my Bible for an hour every single day. Set realistic goals. I looked up and it said the average person, depending on obviously how fast you read or whatnot, can read through the New Testament in about 18 hours. If you were to read for 15 minutes every day, 4 times a week, that would be an hour a week. And you would be able to finish the entire New Testament in 18 weeks. And so to me, I feel like that's a pretty realistic goal. So I'm going to start that now, start reading through my New Testament. We're going to do a Bible study at church through Mark that I'm teaching. We'll start that up this next Wednesday. And so I'll have some other reading going on as well, especially if I'm trying to prepare a sermon for preaching somewhere. I'll have some other reading as well, but I'm going to start this week at the beginning of Matthew and start reading through. And so I would encourage you to follow along with me. I won't probably give you an update every week, but maybe every few weeks or so, I'll give you an update of where I'm at, how things are going. These episodes are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. I do know that YouTube allows comments. You can throw it in there where you're at. If you plan on doing the read through with me, let me know. Today, I want to give you some tips, things that you can utilize and use in your life to make a difference. And I think you really have to look back before you can look forward. I think you have to really examine yourself. And the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 13, verse number 5, to examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. says, "Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you?" And we are taught to examine ourselves. And I think that's something that we can really struggle to do. It's so much easier to look at other people and see the faults. Years back, my brother and his family, they had went to a town for a small getaway, and they needed a hotel in this area. And I'm not going to say what town it was or anything of that nature, but they were staying in a very historic, very well-known hotel in this area. And when they walked in, they realized that it was absolutely disgusting. The rooms were very dirty. The carpet was very dirty. It had a bad smell. It was a very old hotel. Not a lot of upkeep had been done to the rooms. There was mold. There was mold around the air conditioner. It was just a very bad thing. But after his wife had a very intense discussion with him, he began to realize that they are not staying there tonight. They are going to need to find another hotel. And so they started searching for another hotel. And they found another one, and so they went ahead and booked it. And when my brother went down to explain that they were leaving and why they were leaving, the people that he talked to at the front desk, they apologized, and they knew exactly what he was talking about. And they said something along the lines of, "We try to do the best we can with what we have." And so, unfortunately, they just understood that their rooms really weren't up to par, and they really understood when people checked out and said, "We just can't stay here." And so they apologized and they were very understanding. However, I've encountered the complete opposite before in my life. We live in a small town, and social media, different businesses will come into the community. I remember a certain business came into the community and they started making some pretty controversial Facebook posts about some different beliefs they had. And hey, I'm a pretty opinionated person, but I also understand that some opinions probably should be kept to myself, especially if I'm trying to run a business and make a profit for my family or take care of my family. And so, this certain business, they were making very controversial posts. And I remember a discussion I had with some friends one time, and I said, "I really can't imagine any good coming from these posts that they are making. And I don't see how they can make it in this town making some of the comments that they are making." And as some time went on, they ended up closing down, and the business did not make it. I feel like they had a really hard time understanding why the business didn't make it and why they weren't receiving the support that maybe they thought they should be receiving. And it was so easy for me to see where they went wrong. And I'm sure there were so many people that it was also easy for them to see. And sometimes we encounter situations in our lives where everyone else can see it and we really struggle to see it. And so I encourage you to really examine yourself, really step back and look at your life and examine the things that you went through in 2024, the things that you encountered in your life. Another thing I encourage you to do is to write down your top responsibilities and not your dreams. If you are a parent, if you have children, you have a responsibility to your children to be a role model in their life, someone that is taking them to church, someone that is having godly discussions with them, someone that is trying to guide them in their life towards God and giving them sound advice. There are responsibilities that we have in our life, and I would again encourage you to focus upon those responsibilities and write those things down. If we're not careful, we can become so focused upon our goals that we begin to lose focus upon our responsibilities. And I can tell you that as I was beginning to put this together, I'm guilty of that in 2024, where I got so focused on some goals in my life that I forgot about some of my responsibilities. And so let's focus upon our responsibilities. If you're making a goal, I'm going to read my Bible through April. I'm going to read the New Testament and I'm going to finish by April. And if you don't meet that goal, you can still look back and say, maybe you didn't meet your time frame, but you still have read more of your Bible than maybe you ever have. And be willing to adjust that goal, but also to stay focused on your goal and to get it accomplished. And then write out practical steps to achieve those goals that you have. For example, if you're going to read through the New Testament, you need to write out some practical steps that you can take to achieve those goals. Instead of scrolling social media every morning when you wake up, you read your Bible for 15 minutes. Maybe before you go to bed, instead of turning on the TV, you start reading your Bible for 15, 20 minutes. You have to take practical steps to achieve those goals. And so, as followers of Christ, I think we can all agree that we want to be closer to Christ in 2025. We want to lead more people to Christ. We want to make a difference in our church. There's so many goals that I have for 2025. And I think with the right steps and with the right mindset, we can really begin to accomplish these goals. I think these are some practical ways that you can really begin to see a difference in your life. I read a study here a while back and I shared it on an episode of the podcast, but reading your Bible 4 times a week and the difference that it begins to make in your life, you're like 200% more likely to witness to someone if you read your Bible 4 times or more per week. You're more likely to disciple others. You're less likely to feel depression and anxiety. You're less likely to feel isolated and alone. You're less likely to turn to alcohol and alcoholism. You're less likely to do so many different things. It's really crazy when you begin to read your Bible, the difference it makes in your life. And so this year in 2025, I'd like to take some Bible courses. There's some free Bible courses that our pastor had talked about this week. God has placed a calling in my life. And that was one of the reasons that I started this podcast I knew the calling that God had placed in my life to really reach out and try to help others. And I feel like if I'm not doing that, then I feel like I'm really not fulfilling the calling that God has placed in my life. So here in 2025, I really want to focus on this podcast, try to get some different people on. I have noticed that a lot of people really get nervous and apprehensive when you ask them to come on your podcast. They don't want to talk on the podcast too much, but I'm going to get after some people and I hope to have some guests on the podcast. If you're listening and you got a testimony to share, you would love to come on the podcast, we can definitely set that up. Please reach out to me. You can reach out to me on social media. If you have my number, reach out to me that way. And also, I encourage you, write down your goals and let's make 2025 an absolute blast and let's get closer to Christ. I hope you have a blessed 2025. I hope you grow closer to Christ than you've ever been. And I hope you can really get to a place to where you begin to share the gospel with others and that you really begin to get into the place to where God can really use you. And I'm not saying that just as like you, I'm saying that to me as well, that we get to a place to where God can really begin to use us and that we can make a difference in our communities and the lives of others.